My name is Mara Hope. I was 30 years old when my life handed me the most expensive lesson I never saw coming. And the painful part, I had every sign I needed to avoid it. I just refused to look. But let me start from the beginning. I had spent 6 years climbing from junior HR officer to head of human resources at my company. 6 years of early mornings, difficult conversations, and solving problems that nobody else wanted to touch. By 30, I was sitting in a chair that most people in my office didn't reach until their 40s. I once resolved a dispute between two senior managers who had refused to speak to each other directly for 6 months. By the end of that meeting, they were shaking hands. My colleagues called it a miracle. I called it a Wednesday. My staff respected me. Some of them feared me a little, but the ones who had worked with me the longest, the ones who had seen me stand up for people nobody else would defend, they genuinely loved me for it. Because I was straight the way people are straight when they actually believe in you. There is a difference, and my team knew it. Outside of work, I was equally grounded. I was in church every Sunday. I led the women's fellowship unit. I prayed every morning with the same discipline I brought to everything else in my life. I knew what a woman of God looked like. I had spent years building myself into one. I had a senior sister called Nadia who was 2 years older and the most no nonsense person I had ever met. And at work, I had Jade, my colleague, my office neighbor, the woman who sat beside me every day and could read my face the way I read everyone else's. These are the people who saw what was coming long before I did, and they tried to warn me, but we'll get to that. For now, just understand this about me. I was not careless. I was not naive. I was not someone who rushed into things without thinking. I was a woman who was very good at solving problems, and I had never once stopped to ask myself, what happens when the problem is one I created myself? Hello, guys. You're welcome to today's episode, and I welcome you to Faith is by More, where every story is real, every lesson is end, and God always has the final say. So, guys, in today's episode, please stay with me till the end because you're gonna learn one or two things. All right. So let's continue with our story. I met Marcus through work, a mutual professional connection, a shared meeting, a shared laugh at the end of it, and then a conversation that went on longer than either of us planned. Two people, two believers, and honestly, it felt like one of those connections you don't plan. The kind God slips into your calendar without asking. Marcus Osia was 37, oil and gas contractor. He carried himself like a man who had already figured out a few things about life that most people were still trying to work out. Calm, focused, the kind of man who listened properly when you spoke, and that alone, just being truly listened to, was enough to make me pay attention. He was a believer, he said so easily and without performance. He knew scripture, he prayed before meals, he spoke about God like someone who had a real history with him. We were friends first, easy, natural, professional, the kind of friendship where time disappears and you realize afterwards that 2 hours passed without either of you noticing. Then, one evening, Marcus looked at me across a dining table and said, Mara, I think you already know where I am going with this, but I want to say it properly. I would like us to do this seriously if you are open to it. I looked at him for a moment, then I said yes. I said yes before I had fully processed the question. That was the first sign, not to anything sinister, just of the fact that something in me had already decided before my mind caught up that this man was worth saying yes to. He proposed properly 6 months later. I said yes again, faster this time. Now, before we go any further, you need to understand something about what Marcus was like in the beginning. Because if you don't understand that part, the rest of the story won't make sense. Marcus was wonderful, and not in a small way. The kind of wonderful that makes you wonder if someone has been taking notes on your life without you knowing. Early in our relationship, he enrolled me in a professional development course I had mentioned once in passing. In the middle of a conversation about something else entirely, I had said I had been wanting to do it for 2 years, but the timing was never right. 3 weeks later, the confirmation email arrived, fully paid. I called him immediately. Marcus, did you? You said the timing was never right. He said, so I fixed the timing. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after that call. Nobody had ever done something like that for me before. Not quietly, not without being asked. Then there was the restaurant. You remember the place I had mentioned once, 6 months earlier in a conversation I had already forgotten. He made the reservation without telling me, but when we arrived that evening, I noticed something on the table that made me stop walking. A handbag, the exact one I had pointed at bravely through a shop window when we walked past it one afternoon. I had said, "Oh, that is beautiful," and kept walking. That was all. I had never mentioned it again. You remember that? I said. I couldn't even remember saying it. I remembered everything you tell me, Marcus said simply, and the way he said it made it sound like the most natural thing in the world. He paid off something I had been quietly carrying for months, a financial pressure I had never told him about directly. I found out when the balance cleared. When I called him, he said only, "Don't carry things alone when I am here." And beside where the notification came through, I found a small jewelry box, a delicate gold necklace with a pendant I had admired in a magazine and never said anything about. I had no idea how he had found it. There was also the Friday evening. He showed up at my door unannounced. I had had a terrible week at work, one of those weeks where everything that could go wrong did. By Friday evening, I was drained in a way I couldn't fully explain. I hadn't told Marcus any of it. He knocked at my door at 7 in the evening. When I opened it, he was standing there holding a food tray, a proper home cooked meal, covered and warm, the kind my mother used to make. He had cooked it himself. I didn't even know he could cook like that. I just thought you might need company that doesn't require anything from you tonight, Marcus said. I stood at the door and looked at him and felt something I had no word for. Not just gratitude, something deeper, the feeling of being truly seen by someone who wasn't looking for anything in return. And then there was the morning I woke up to find he had sent flowers to the office before I even arrived. An ordinary Thursday, no occasion, no reason, just a small card that said, "Have a good day. I am proud of you." My colleague 3 desks away leaned over and said, "Mara, who is doing this to you?" I just smiled. I couldn't even explain it properly. People noticed. My colleagues asked who was making me smile like that. Women from my fellowship unit said I seemed lighter. Even Nadia, the one who did not give compliments easily, looked at me one evening over dinner and said quietly, "I am glad you found someone who sees you properly, Mara." And I smiled and said, "He really does, Nadia. He really does." I had never been loved like this before, and that is not a small thing. That is actually a very important thing to hold on to as this story continues, because you need to understand why I stayed. You need to understand what I was holding on to before you judge me for not letting go. This was my fairy tale, and I was completely, wholeheartedly inside it, and I was not ready to wake up from it, not even a little bit. Here is something nobody tells you about red flags. They do not arrive wearing red. They arrive quietly, wrapped in something ordinary, and by the time you realize what they are, you have already given them 17 different names, nicer names, softer names, names that makes them easier to live with. I was very good at giving things nicer names. Marcus had a temper, not a constant one, not an obvious one, but small things. A driver who cut him off in traffic, a phone call that went badly, something at work that didn't go the way he planned, could shift his mood in a way that changed the whole atmosphere around him. Not frightening, just different. Like a sky that was clear one moment and then, without much warning, decided it was thinking about a storm, and then it would pass. He would collect himself and he would be Marcus again, warm, present, the man I loved. I named it stress, the demand of oil and gas, a busy man carrying heavy responsibilities. Any strong man deals with that. I told myself that is just life. There was one Saturday afternoon when we were at a mutual friends gathering, a relaxed thing, friends and food and easy conversation. At some point, the host made a joke, a harmless one, the kind people make without thinking, that touched on something Marcus was sensitive about. I felt Marcus go still beside me. The hair around him changed. I touched his hand quietly under the table and said nothing. He was polite for the rest of the evening. He smiled, he laughed when he was supposed to laugh. Nobody else noticed something, but in the car on the way home, he did not speak, not one word, for the entire 40-minute drive. I tried once. Are you okay? I asked. I am fine, Marcus said. Two words, flat, door closed. I didn't try again. I sat with the silence and stared out of the window and named it exhaustion. He was tired. It had been a long week. That was all. Then there was the fellowship question. My church was hosting a conference I had been looking forward to for months. A big one, the kind with ministers I respected and sections that would run all day. I mentioned it to Marcus one Friday evening, already excited, already imagining us there together. Marcus smiled and shook his head. Mara, you know I am a believer. You know that. I just don't feel the need to be at every gathering to maintain my relationship with God. God and I are fine. I nodded slowly. What could I say to that? Was it wrong exactly? I wasn't sure. I went to the conference alone. I filed it away. The same thing happened the next time I invited him, and the time after that. A revival my church organized, a special Sunday service with a visiting minister I had talked about for weeks, a prayer night I had been attending every month since before I met Marcus. Every time Marcus said some version of the same thing, calm, comfortable, completely unbothered. God and I are fine, Mara. And every time I went home, I filed it away, told myself it was fine. What I didn't ask myself was this: if God and Marcus were so fine, why did he never want to be in a room where God was being seriously sought? Why was the relationship always fine privately, but never something he wanted to feel publicly? What kind of relationship grows in isolation from everything that would strengthen it? I didn't ask those questions, not yet. Then came the disappearance, and this one had a beginning. I came home from the conference that evening excited, still full of everything I had heard. Marcus had stopped by my apartment the way he often did, and I was sharing it with him, still in my church clothes, still carrying the energy of the day. Marcus, you really should have been there. I honestly think it would have helped you. I meant it lovingly. I said it the same way I would say, come and taste this food. It is so good. Just an invitation, just enthusiasm. But Marcus looked up from where he was sitting. His expression had shifted. Helped me with what exactly? He said. Something in his tone made me pause, but I continued. Just the way he spoke about surrender, about letting God into the parts you kept private. I just thought it was something you might. Mara, his voice was flat now. I told you God and I are fine. I don't need a conference to fix what is not broken. I didn't say you were broken. That is exactly what you said. Marcus, this is not what I meant. You have been back 20 minutes and you are already telling me what I need. He stood up and picked up his car keys from the table. I should go. I stood in my sitting room alone after he left. I had not meant it that way. I genuinely had not. I was just sharing something that had moved me. That was all. But Marcus had heard what he heard, and his pride had already made its decision. He didn't call to say he had gotten home safely, the way he usually did. The next morning, he didn't call at all. By the second day, the calls were not being answered. By the third day, the texts were going unread. I called Nadia on the third day. He hasn't called. He hasn't tested. All I said was that I thought the conference would have helped him, and now it's been 3 days. I said. Nadia was quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully, Mara, a man who goes completely silent over a comment that touched his pride is showing you something, not about the comment, about himself. That is how he handles things he doesn't want to deal with. And you need to think about that. I heard her. I didn't answer. On the fourth day, Marcus appeared at my door. He had flowers and he had a gift that made me stop in the doorway. A large, ridiculous teddy bear, the kind that is so oversized it barely fits the door, with a small card attached that said sorry in his handwriting. I looked at the bear, I looked at him, and despite everything, despite 4 days of silence, despite the way he had twisted my words, despite Nadia's voice still sitting in my mind, I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was the most ridiculous thing I had ever seen. I love you, Marcus said quietly, looking directly at me. And I handled that badly. I know that. I believed him because it was true. He did love me. He genuinely did. And he knew he had handled it badly. That part was also true. What neither of us said, what neither of us perhaps fully understood yet, was that knowing you handled something badly and being willing to change how you handle things are two very different conversations. I let him in. I let the 4 days go. I filed it away. And I told myself what I had been telling myself for months now. I could fix this after the wedding. When we were properly together, I could help him get there. I had handled other things than this before. Jade noticed things. That was her gift. She sat beside me every day. She could read me the way I read everyone else, quietly, carefully, without making a show of it. She noticed things I didn't even notice about myself, like how some Mondays morning I came in carrying something in my face that I hadn't put there on purpose, not sadness exactly, more like the expression of a woman who has spent the weekend managing something she hasn't told anyone about. She also noticed something else, something she thought about for a long time before she said it out loud. I could handle anyone at work, difficult staff, unreasonable managers. I walked into those situations with complete composure. I knew exactly what I was doing. But when Marcus called and Jade had watched this more than once, something shifted. My composure adjusted. My voice changed slightly. There was a carefulness that wasn't there in any other conversations. One Wednesday afternoon, when the office was quiet and it was just the two of us left, Jade looked up from her screen and said simply, "Has anything shifted with Marcus?" I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "He is not perfect, but neither am I. I believe God can work with both of us." Jade nodded. She didn't argue, but she kept watching. Nadia was more direct. She had always been more direct. That was just who she was. She sat me down one Saturday afternoon, poured the tea, said nothing for a moment, just looked at me. Then she asked, "Mara, are you happy?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. Nadia nodded slowly. Then she asked the second question, the one that mattered more. "Have you actually prayed about this? Not for peace about your decision, but really sat with God and asked Him, Lord, is this the person you have for me? Is this your specific answer for my specific life?" I was quiet for longer this time. Then I said yes. I had prayed. I had peace. I believed God would use me to reach Marcus, to draw him deeper into his faith. I could already see the man he was becoming. Nadia put her cup down slowly and she said gently but clearly, "Mara, God uses people, but he does not need your marriage to complete his assignment for someone else's soul. That is not a trade he asked you to make. And carrying someone's spiritual growth as a condition of your marriage is not faith, It is a plan you made and asked God to bless. I heard it. I turned it over in my mind. I sat with it, but I was not ready to receive it because the wedding was already being planned. The dress had already been chosen. The invitations were already going out. And Marcus had just sent flowers to my office that morning with a note that said, I cannot wait to marry you. We got married on a Saturday in November. The church was full, the weather was perfect. Marcus stood at the altar in a classic black suit and white shirt and looked like the answer to every prayer I had ever prayed about this part of my life. People cried, good tears, happy tears. My mother was in the front row, pressing a handkerchief to her face from the moment I appeared at the entrance. Nadia stood beside me as maid of honor and smiled the whole time, a real smile because whatever her concerns were, she loved me and she wanted this to be everything I believed it was. Jade was in the third row and spent most of the ceremony trying not to cry and failing completely. It was a beautiful wedding, genuinely beautiful. And Marcus meant every word he said at that altar. That is important. He was not performing. He was not pretending. He loved me. He wanted this marriage. He intended everything he promised. But there is a difference between intending something and being willing to do the internal work that makes it possible. Between wanting a marriage and being willing to surrender the part of yourself that marriage will require you to give up. Marcus had not done that work yet, and he did not know he hadn't. And I walked down the aisle carrying my bouquet in one hand and a quiet private certainty in the other. I will help him get there. I had always helped people get to where they needed to be. This was no different. The thing about marriage is that it removes the distance. When you are with someone before marriage, you see them in selected moments, their best self, the version they have prepared for you. Marriage closes that gap. You are now in the same house, the same mornings, the same bad days, the same arguments that don't get resolved before bedtime, and you start to see things that the courtship period was never designed to show you. The first few months were still good, not perfect, but good. There were mornings when Marcus made breakfast and we ate together in the quiet before the day started. And I thought, this is it. This is what I said yes to. And I was glad. There were evenings when we talked properly, the way you can only talk when you share a home. But the other things were also there, and without distance, they were bigger. The first thing I discovered was that the temper I had seen from a distance was different up close. When Marcus raised his voice in our home, it filled the rooms. It wasn't violence. It wasn't anything that crossed a clear line, but it was loud in a way that left something behind even after the noise stopped. A particular kind of quiet that followed it. The quiet of me deciding what expression to put on my face, waiting for the storm to pass, recalibrating. One evening, I had simply asked what he wanted for dinner. Something about the way I asked it, I still don't know what exactly, landed wrong for him. His response filled the kitchen. I stood there for a moment after it was over and looked at the pot in my hand and thought, I have sat across from people at work who have done worse things than this man just did, and I handled it without flinching. But those were not my husband, and that was not my home. And then Marcus would come back. He always came back. He would look at me with genuine sorry in his eyes and say, Mara, I am sorry. That wasn't right. You know I love you. And I did know the love was not the question. I never doubted the love. The second thing I discovered was his mother. His mother was not a difficult woman. She was warm. She was pleasant. She had welcomed me with a open arms, but she was the first in every decision, in every situation where Marcus needed to take a position before me, before our marriage, before anything else. One Sunday evening, Marcus cancelled plans we had made, plans I had been looking forward to all week. Because his mother had called, he didn't discuss it. He informed me, Marcus, we had plans. I said quietly, Mara, it is my mother. Marcus said. His tone closed the conversation before it had properly begun. I sat with that. I tried to frame it as love for his mother, honor, something good, but the pattern kept repeating. His mother's preference came first. Her opinion on things in our home was mentioned by Marcus in a way that made it clear it was not just an opinion. And then there was the malice. When Marcus was truly offended, truly wounded in his pride, he did not shout, he went cold. A silence so complete and so deliberate that our home became a different kind of place. He would move through it like I wasn't there, answer my question with the minimum number of words, withhold himself entirely until he decided the punishment was finished. Days would pass like this. Then he would return warm again, normal again, as if nothing had happened. The longest stretch lasted 5 days. I still cannot remember exactly what started it. I had disagreed with something he said, not aggressively, just honestly. And Marcus had looked at me once and said nothing and then withdrawn completely. 5 days in my own home with a man who walked past me like I was furniture, like I wasn't there, like I hadn't just become his wife. On the third day, I sat at the dining table in the evening and opened my Bible, not because I felt spiritual, not because I didn't know what else to do with myself. And I read a verse I had read 100 times before, but it landed differently that night. I closed the Bible without writing anything down. I just sat there. One Thursday morning, I sat in my car outside our home for 15 minutes before driving to work. I couldn't make myself go back inside. The silence from the night before was still sitting in the air of the house, and I wasn't ready to walk back into it. I called Jade. We disagreed about something Wednesday evening. I said, something small. And now it has been 2 days and he's acting like I don't exist in my own home. Jade was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mara, do you remember the brief you wrote last month for the account manager? The one about how sustained emotional withdrawal is one of the most harmful patterns in close relationship. I didn't answer. You wrote that brief, Mara. Jade said quietly. You wrote it. The line went silent. I sat in my car and stared at nothing, and I felt something I had been avoiding for months begin to take a shape I could no longer pretend I didn't recognize. There came a Monday morning early before Marcus was awake. When I sat at the kitchen table with my Bible open and my tea going cold, and I finally looked at my life honestly, not at Marcus, at myself. I thought about everything I had renamed. The temper I called stress, the fellowship refusals I called personal preference, the disappearance I called him needing space, the malice I called him needing time, the pride I called confidence, the mother I called love. 17 different names, all gentler, all mine. And then I had walked down the aisle carrying the certainty that my love, my faith, and my ability to fix things would finish the work I had started. I was an HR manager. I fixed impossible situations for a living. I had evidence, real evidence, that I would handle what was broken. But that Monday morning, I finally saw the truth I have been avoiding. What I fixed at work, I fixed them because the people involved agreed something needed to change. They came to the table, they were open. Marcus had not made that decision, and I could not make it for him. He loved me, that was real. I never doubted that. But loving me and being willing to change are two completely different things. You can love someone and still protect the part of yourself you have never surrendered. You can be a believer and still keep God at the surface. You can mean every word of your wedding vows and still have a self inside you that has never been handed over, not to your spouse, not to your marriage, not to God. I could not reach that place in Marcus. Only God could, and only Marcus could decide to open the door. I had been living in a mirage, a beautiful gift wrapped mirage of a marriage that would become what I believed it could be if I just loved enough, waited enough, fixed enough. But God never asked me to carry that. He asked me to come to Him first, before the yes, before the ring, to sit with Him and ask the question I was too afraid to ask. Lord, is this your answer to my prayer? Or is this my answer that I am asking you to bless. I was afraid of his no, so I prayed for peace and called it an answer. I prayed for strength and called it a green light. I never actually asked the real question because what if he said no? What would I do with the dress, the invitations, the man who bought the handbag I pointed at through a shop window and sent flowers to my office just to say I am proud of you? I have been afraid of God's no, so I never properly asked. I thought about Nadia's words, the ones I filed away. Carrying someone's spiritual growth as a condition of your marriage is not fate, it is a plan you made and asked God to bless. I thought about Jade. You wrote that brief, Mara. You wrote it. They both saw it. I took their words, thanked them quietly, and filed those away too. And sitting there at the kitchen table, I finally admitted something I had never said out loud before. I thought I could fix him. That was the truth. Not that I didn't love him, not that I didn't believe in God, but underneath all of it, underneath the prayers, patience, the excuses, I genuinely believed I could reach the part of Marcus that even God was waiting on me with my love, with my faith, with my track record. That was my mistake. I got on my knees on the kitchen floor, Bible still open on the table, tea still cold. Lord, I came into this thinking I could fix what only you can touch. I renamed every sign you showed me. I heard the people you placed in my life and I answered them with stubbornness dressed up as a faith. I didn't understand that believing in you and working with you are two different things. And I didn't stop long enough to ask you which one I was saying yes to. I am not asking you to fix this the way I used to think fixing looked. I am asking you to take it, all of it, because I have been carrying something I was never designed to carry, and I am tired, Lord. I am genuinely tired. I stayed on that floor for a long time, long enough for the light outside the window to change. When I got up, I didn't have any plan. I didn't know whether to stay or go. I didn't have answers. But for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, I have stopped trying to fix something with my own hands and placed it in the hands of God. And on that Monday morning, that was enough to begin with. Here is what the story is really about. It is not about a bad man. Marcus was not a bad man. He was a man with an unsurrendered self. His love was real. His belief in God was real. But his walk with God had never gone past the surface. And when marriage required him to go deeper, he discovered he was not yet ready. And it is not about me making a terrible mistake. I fell in love. I said yes to a man who loved me genuinely. There is nothing wrong with any of that. What went wrong was that I was afraid to ask God the full question. I prayed around it, but I never sat with Him long enough to ask, Lord, is this the person you have for me, or is this the person I chose and I am asking you to bless? I was afraid of His no, and that fear kept me from ever really hearing His answer. The gift blinded me, not because I was foolish, but because I was human, because I had never been loved like that before. And when love arrives in a form you have been waiting for, sometimes you receive it before asking God whether it was sent for you. I also believed my faith and my capability were enough. I was a fixer. I had fixed other things. But God doesn't ask you to marry a project. He doesn't need your marriage to finish his work in someone else's life. Here is the thing nobody says enough. Being a Christian and working with God are not the same thing. You can pray before meals, you can know scripture, you can say God and I are fine and mean it completely and still never let him pass the comfortable surface. Marcus believed in God, but he has never surrendered to God. I did not stop to ask which one I was marrying, whether I stayed or whether I left. I will let you sit with that. But before you go, I want to leave you with one question. Would you go into a relationship like this? Eyes on the gift? Heart in the fairy tale before you stopped to ask God the one question you were afraid He might actually answer because the red flags were there. They were always there. I just needed eyes that gift couldn't blind to see them. Until next time on Faith Tales by More, stay prayerful, stay guided, stay focused. God bless you.